From 2012 to 2014, she served as president of the American Ornithological Union, which is the largest professional ornithological society in the world. Throughout her career, she served on many endangered species recovery teams, including for piping plover, red-cockaded woodpecker, the Puerto Rican parrot, red wolf, California condor, the Guam rail, and many others. And she also led the Great Lakes Northern Great Plains piping plover recovery team for over 12 years. And our next speaker is going to be, because they're going to tag team this presentation today, is Dr. Roby. He is a retired professor of wildlife ecology at Oregon State University and the former leader for the wildlife unit for USGS's Oregon Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit in Corvallis on the main campus. He is an internationally renowned seabird biologist and has worked on seabird physiological ecology and conservation in Alaska and Antarctica, Greenland, and China, among other places. In Oregon, some of you may be familiar with his work that has focused on research, conservation, and management of Caspian terns, double-crested cormorants, and other fish-eating colonial water birds up in the Columbia River especially. He has served as chair of the Pacific Seabird Group and has been awarded for his research and conservation efforts by the American Ornithological Union and the Pacific Seabird Group. I am very honored to welcome both of them. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. And I'm hoping you guys can hear me. And thanks everybody for coming. I kind of have to laugh at myself in that looking at the title of this talk, I don't know, as a scientist, I might be tempted to skip it, right? So I appreciate you coming. And I'm going to tell you, this is my, actually, where's my, wait a minute. I've lost the mouse. Right, there we go. Okay, so true confessions. I'm not sure I would come because I would be a snot about it. I would be, I'm just looking at data. I'm not going to come listen to some funky go out and talk to the public kind of thing. I've got better things to do. But especially in the past 5 or 6 years, especially as we start thinking about climate change, and especially since I'm no longer a federal employee, and I'm allowed to speak my mind, I thought perhaps we could take a different tack today. And we're going to talk about the book that Dan and myself and Ram Papish, and I mean, there's a bunch of people that have written a book, and that's what we're going to talk about towards the middle of the talk. But for right now, I wanted to just go into a little bit about what made us write this book and what we're hoping will spur on other scientists to come to talks like this, right? So here is this beautiful double-crested cormorant that Dan has tried to protect for decades. And I think one of the major things that's really helped protect the double-crested cormorant is the fact that there's been really solid science that has been conducted for years, and that you can still use the science, well, you can use the science to try and defend positions that are maybe not as healthy for the cormorants as you might think. And that's because there's this concept I'm going to talk about today called bother. And that's because scientists not only bothered to collect data, but bothered to make that information known to agencies and the public. That's not advocacy. It's just making sure that the reports and the papers that are written are made available. So this concept of bother that I came up with this morning, because I was just trying to think about how scientists could better communicate with agencies and the public, because that's actually what this book is about. I thought it might be worthwhile going through some ideas about scientists. It's a word to scientists about bothering to make sure that their work is known. So the first part of my talk, our talk is going to talk, we're going to talk about why bother, why scientists should take the time to not just write a paper and put it in their desk and write it on their CV, but they should make sure that people are aware of the science they've conducted. And then I'm going to talk about, or Dan actually is going to talk about our approach to what I'm calling bothering. And then we'll talk about, at the end, talk about this great experiment we're launching. So I'm calling it the Great Bother Experiment. So to get started with why bother, what got me going is the fact that, I don't think it's anybody's, it's not news that we have a lot of conservation situations in the world today, especially for birds, that just aren't going well, right? So we're also, I think, in an age of scientific disinformation to a large extent. It's at a time now, especially with climate change and all these things, that I think we're at a time in history where there's people that don't believe in climate change, right? A lot of people in the United States don't believe in climate change. More and more media outlets are either not reporting science, or they don't understand it, so they misreport it, or they just misreport it. And that science is not being taught as objectively as it might have been in the past in schools. So my thing here is it's time for scientists to own their work and be able to explain it in a broader context so that people understand what you're doing and why it's important and what it can do to help. I'm not saying you need to go to the streets and protest. I'm saying we just shouldn't be burying our science, because that is what a lot of science ends up, what happens to a lot of science. So what I'm saying is scientists need to actively share their science with the public and appropriate agencies and officials. That means they need to bother. So I'm yelling at scientists myself, right? I'm just saying to myself, get off your chair and do something. Like, you can't just write a paper about, California condors are going to hell in a handbasket and then go on to your next paper. You need to do something. You need to at least make people aware of what the problem is. So bother. Here's my definition of bother in this context. So what I'm saying bother means is that scientists need to send reports or papers or whatnot about their work explained in lay terms to appropriate agencies or policymakers or whoever could use it. If, we can't really complain about, oh, there's bad information if we aren't providing it in the first place. Also means scientists need to take time to give a talk at an Audubon meeting or talk to reporters. Like, don't just, oh, those reporters, talk to them. Even if you don't like the reporter, talk to them and explain your work. Or call up a reporter and they say, I've got this new paper out on this or that, and I thought you might like to know what was in it. Volunteer, to give a talk at your kid's school. If you don't have kids, volunteer to give a talk at somebody's school anyway. And when I'm talking to scientists, I'm not just talking to people that work on conservation. I'm talking about people, scientists that work on basic issues too, because you just don't know what you're going to affect. So here's my next thing. Why bother? Why should scientists bother? Well, agencies, reporters, the general public, they don't know how to ask you about your work. They don't understand the importance necessarily. So if you bother, they'll know, and maybe they will pay attention. I think also when it comes straight from a scientist's mouth, that it's harder for the message to be distorted, right? When you go play pass the secret, often it doesn't end well. And who knows, by giving a talk at a school or standing up at an Audubon meeting or something, you represent a career path that someone might not have thought of. Everyone thinks when you go into, if you want to go into biology or the life sciences, that you're going to medical school, dental school, or vet school. Well, if they aren't aware of the other opportunities, how would they ever know to go into it? I'm thinking of an anecdote of a story now. Is in Corvallis, every year we have one Saturday where the ornithology students present talks, and we invite high school students and teachers and the general public to come learn more about what goes on at OSU. And it's amazing. I've made calls a number of years to try and get the high school, what am I trying to say, the honors program students to come from the various high schools, and the teachers in charge of them are like, no, they don't want to come. It's not medical school, and they don't understand, because they've probably never seen that, you know, going into something like conservation or wildlife or ornithology means you could be dealing with genetics or physiology or any number of things that you would also deal with in medicine, and you might like it. I mean, you never know, right? Okay, you could make science look cool, always a good thing. And the bottom line is, if your work is not worth talking about, then why are you bothering to do it, right? So anyway, that's my I guess also, when you think about it, and this is more leading into our book, it's amazing what one scientist can accomplish, right? I mean, look at Jane Goodall. She, you know, she's done amazing work on chimpanzees, but also for conservation, just spreading the word about conservation. And I don't really know if she has ever, or I'm not sure she's written peer-reviewed papers. She might have, but she really has gone out and done a lot. Now, we can't all be Jane Goodall, right? But think about this person. This is Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson obviously is the woman that wrote Silent Spring in the 1960s that talked about pollution and contaminants and that sort of thing. She was just a biologist, a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist at Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. She was no different than Dan or me here in Corvallis. That's Patuxent's just another research center, you know, but she managed to look at her data and reach out to agencies and the public and say, look, this is what I found. And it's changed our lives. I mean, it's changed the world just from one scientist sitting at Patuxent analyzing their data. More closer to home, this is Chuck Henney. Chuck Henney grew up outside of Salem, and he worked at Patuxent for like a year, but he's a contaminants biologist. He's never left OSU. He got his PhD here. He worked for Fish and Wildlife Service and then USGS, but here on campus, he's a faculty member, or he was retired, in Fisheries and Wildlife and Conservation Science. And Chuck is perhaps the primary person responsible for bringing back the osprey in Oregon and other places. And he's just a federal scientist, but he kept plugging away, and his work became noticed, and, you know, more work, more notice, more work, more notice. Then there's a guy, Fred Ramsey, and I don't know if any people are around still to remember, Fred Ramsey was also born in Oregon. He grew up in Portland with his brother, and they're probably the top birders, or one of the very top birders in the state of Oregon. He's a statistics professor. And I would ask him, like, why are you a statistics professor when you should be an ornithologist? And he said, oh, ornithologists don't make any money. But I mean, I don't know that the statistics department gets paid any more than people in fisheries and wildlife. But in any event, Fred has been on the vast majority of bird graduate students committees at OSU. And his reach has been phenomenal. And it's one of those things where I guess he's not one to go advertise his services, but without his work and people being able to help, to receive his help and then go on and carry out the work that they started out, there's a lot of conservation that wouldn't have gone on in Oregon. And then one other, well, maybe two others, but another person I can think of that I think really is one of those people that will be will be recognized as an absolute pioneer in conservation in Oregon is Eric Forsman. Eric Forsman grew up in Oregon in a family that was involved with logging, and yet when he went to graduate school, he determined that spotted owls weren't doing so well. And you know the upshot of his work. I mean, obviously an entire region of the country exploded over this, but Eric has been able to maintain a very even keel. His science has always been absolutely straight on. He doesn't go out protesting or anything, but he's been very effective in trying to bring about conservation efforts for spotted owls. And then the last person I wanted to talk about was Pepper Trail. Dr. Pepper Trail is, he just retired from the National Wildlife Forensics Lab down in Ashland. The forensics lab is a crime lab. It's really cool, actually, to go down there because it's the only lab of its kind in the world, I believe. And it's a crime lab, but it's just for animals. And so you go down there and they've got the ballistics lab and the the morphology labs and the genetics labs. And it's just like you would go visit the FBI, but they're dealing with lions and tigers and people that shoot spotted owls. So Pepper probably has been responsible. He was the ornithologist till a couple months ago. He has been responsible for really being able to prosecute an incredible number of people that were doing things that we probably would not be too happy about. And he's truly made his mark. So the message is, if it's not you being a scientist, then who, right? And my other message to scientists is, did you want someone else to send your message? My guess is no. Scientists are very protective of their work. And I think that if they thought someone else was going on spouting about their work, that they would rather be the ones to do it. So I guess my point in just this beginning part is, and leading into talking about our project that we call, where we decided to bother, is that scientists need to, get on the stick and stop just hiding things in desk drawers and come out and really try and make people more aware of their work. Okay, so that, my little speech for the moment. With that, what I wanted to do was turn it over to Dan, who's going to talk to you about our project.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue, and thanks, Dawn, because she just had to leave. I'm going to just spend a few moments talking to you about our book project, the one that Sue started out working on gamely and then roped me in on. But she deserves most of the blame for this project, I have to say. So our approach to bothering, as Sue has said, was to embark on trying to produce this volume as the Condor Soars, which is about conserving and restoring Oregon's birds. And it was a project that Sue was the lead editor on, and I was trying to help her out in that capacity, along with Tashi Haig, who is Sue's niece. And as I think most of you know, Ram Papish, who is here today, is the primary, or actually the sole artist whose work is shown in the book. And from the very start, we wanted this book about restoring and conserving Oregon's birds to be attractive. So that's why we got Ram involved, is because we knew his work would be incomparable. And this is the cover of the book. Here's the book. And Ram painted the cover, of course, which was actually done for the AOU meeting in, I can't remember the year, Ram, maybe you can. 2010 sounds right to me. At any rate, so what we try to do in this book is provide simple synopses of long-term avian conservation efforts in Oregon that were written by the scientists who led or were intensively involved in that work. So Sue primarily recruited 37 different authors to write sections of the book. We won't really call them chapters. They were sections that were tied together by Sue in a number of different chapters. It was organized by ecosystem. so that we had the coastal and nearshore ecosystem represented by a number of essays. Inland arid lands ecosystem was represented by another series, and wetlands and riverine systems was incorporated in another ecosystem section. So we try to separate the works based on the very wide ecosystem diversity that we are benefited from being Oregonians. So in addition to these sections that address various conservation issues that focused on birds in the state of Oregon, we also provided a number of tables and timelines for various events, legislation, rules that affected bird conservation throughout the state of Oregon. So these tables of significant events are a big part of this and help make it a good reference for people who are looking at the history of avian conservation in Oregon. We also provided, I think, a total of 54 different biographies of fairly well-known ornithologists. This here, you see John Weens's biography here. Some of you may not know that John Weens was actually a faculty member in the Department of Zoology at OSU for quite some time before he moved to New Mexico and Colorado State, where he spent most of his career. But he was major professor for a number of graduate students here, including Michael Scott, who some of you may know, who did his work on seabird bioenergetics along the coast of Oregon. So these biographies provide historical context for not just the people who were writing sections of the book, but for others who, in this case, John Weens wrote the foreword to the book, but there were a number of others who didn't make contributions to the written part of the book, but they were featured as well because they are well-known scientists, ornithologists who conducted most of their research in the state of Oregon and lived here for much of their professional lives. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, making this book enticing involved having a bunch of very attractive and accurate paintings and drawings of Oregon's avifauna, and Ram Papish did an incredible job of portraying a wide variety of Oregon species for the book. This is the lead-off painting for the section on the marine and near coastal ecosystem in Oregon. So a lot of effort was put into, particularly by Ram, into making this an attractive book that would not just be a lot of text, but would also be inspirational for people who are interested in Oregon's birds. And here's another one of the paintings that's in the book. This one introduces the arid lands ecosystem that Ram did. This is artwork that John Weens found so attractive that he wanted a copy of it. So we provided him with one, with Ram's permission, of course. And here's another painting that Ram did of acorn woodpeckers, a charismatic and characteristic bird of Oregon's oak woodlands. The writers are a very diverse group. I mentioned that there were 37 different authors who contributed sections to the book. You probably recognize some of the folks that are here. And Sue, myself, and Tashi are up at the top with as the editors. But these folks, these 37 co-authors really did the bulk of the writing of particular sections. Although Sue did a number of sections on her own. And also we had a variety of photographs of Oregon's birds that were taken by the folks that you see here. There were 17 contributing photographers. Roy Lowe, who's here, is one of them. You can see his photograph here, and a number of others. Sue was involved. I was involved in providing photographs as well. And the idea here, and some of the photographs that appear in the book are ones that you've seen already in this presentation. Sue included them here. So the idea was to really try and present a good cross-section of photographs of Oregon's birds, and ones that would illustrate some of the science that has been conducted on Oregon's avifauna. As I've already alluded to, we had a fabulous artist who many of you know, and this is a fabulous photograph of him. Ram did, I think, what is really has to be considered an incredible job portraying all the birds that are featured in the book, including a whole lot of line drawings like this one that he produced for trumpeter swans coming in at Vista House on the Columbia River. These kind of were the capstone of a number of sections on individual bird species, these colored line drawings that Ram did. So, since the book was published this past December, we have managed to sell about 1,000 copies of the book. We're still pushing the book, publicizing the book as much as we can, because the profits from these books, there's sort of a narrow profit margin here, given what we have to pay in order to get copies of the books from the publisher, which is Chicago University Press, is actually printing the books, but Oregon State University Press is publishing the book. But the profits that we make from the book all go to buying additional books that can be donated to agencies, educational institutions, elementary schools, libraries, those sorts of entities, so that we can get the word out about the conservation issues with birds in Oregon. And OSU Press has seen to donating 50 books to send to policymakers and agency heads and various universities throughout the region in order to try and get the word out about the various conservation issues for birds that the book deals with. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sue so that she can talk to us about the next bother experiment, which we would like to see as an outgrowth of As the Condor Soars, and she will tell you a little bit about that.
Hindsight is 20/20, right? And if we had known, I wish we had retitled the book, put it that way. If we had known what we know now, or thinking what we're thinking now, we might have called this book The Handbook of Oregon Avian Conservation, because now the response has from people not just in Oregon, but from around the country, that ornithologists that we've talked to, people really wish they had a book like this book for their state. And so what we've done is we've put together a proposal to expand it, and it would be an effort sponsored by the American Ornithologist. No, it's not. They changed, you know, I was president. I changed the name of the organization. I can't remember it. Was the AOU. What is it? No, it's American Ornithological Society, I think. But anyway, so what we're doing now is we're working on expanding this concept of this handbook, and what we're calling, and we change it every day, but what we're calling it today, the Western Hemisphere Handbook of Avian Conservation, or Handbooks. And the idea would be to have one produced for every state and province. We proposed actually to have one created for every state and province. And then the AOS came back and said they wanted that, but they wanted us to organize having one produced for every Caribbean country and every Latin American country. Like, oh, great, good thing we're retired. But I do not intend to write another one of these, but the idea would be to get people in each state, province, and wherever to try and, well, to pull together what we did. Because the idea with this book is it's like it's a one-stop reference for, you know, any of the projects that have gone on, the history, the legislature, it's kind of like the easiest way to come up with any sort of avian conservation information for a state that you could. So we're hoping that we're working with the AOS to further define exactly how this is going to work, but we're hoping that it will work, because I think it would be a pretty amazing contribution, and it would be a way that scientists could talk about bothering. Like this is a way scientists can present their science in an, you know, non-technical fashion that could be useful. And so we wouldn't, you know, shake our fingers at them anymore and say, oh, you guys, you just bury your stuff. This would be amenable, or this would be available to lawmakers and whoever else. So that is our plan for the moment. And I wanted to stop end by saying, well, here's World Migratory Bird Day, and say Happy World Migratory Bird Day, but then also say that World Migratory Bird Day is brought to you by scientists who bothered. So if you're a scientist and you're sitting there going, just think about it, you know, doesn't hurt, just little notes here and there to people would really probably help. So that's my note to my fellow scientists. You know, will you bother? Will you really reach out so that people know more about what's going on with our science? And then Dawn asked that I put this up because here is the schedule for what's going on for World Migratory Bird Day here in Lincoln and Tillamook County. And so I'll just leave this up for people that are here, and you can make note of these events going on this weekend. There's a lot going on. And if not, let's see, there must be a website. I bet if you looked up Fish and Wildlife Service in Newport, Oregon, you could figure it out. So with that, we'll end and see if anyone has any questions.
Any questions from the room?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for this presentation. It was fascinating. I am a business professor. I do not teach at Oregon State. I teach online for Washington State University. I'm going to present a paper this summer at the Academy of Management. And I'm hoping that I can give you my card and you will share your slides with me, because I was listening and I love birds. My husband is a wonderful bird photographer, et cetera, et cetera. I would love to use this as a basis to say why bother for my paper that I'm going to present. I would love that.
Oh,
And
no, it's great.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the room online? Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just have a message from Mary over at the library. She says, Gwen and Valley Libraries have copies of the book. Gwen's is currently checked out, but you can put a hold on it, or you can request to have Valley's copy sent over here. It's also available as an ebook.
Is it?
That's what Mary just said.
Wow. Seriously, cool. I'll have to read it. No. Well, so that's good. So people can get it at the OSU library or apparently online, or here you can buy it at many places. So that's great.
Any other questions from the room? All right, well, will you please all join me? Oh, did you? Will you all please join me in thanking our speakers today?
Okay, thank you for coming.